The screech of the train's brakes barely registered with James Cooper as he settled into the priority seat, his weight shifting to accommodate the phantom pain shooting up from where his left leg used to be. At 34, the former Army Ranger had mastered the art of masking discomfort, a skill honed through 2 harrowing tours in Afghanistan and perfected during 3 years of civilian life after an IED had violently rewritten his future. Coffee. The barista at the station had noticed his slight limp earlier, her eyes flickering momentarily to his left leg before meeting his gaze with a warm smile. It was this small human connection that James appreciated most on his morning commutes, the subtle acknowledgement without pity. Now, as the unusually crowded 7:45 train lurched forward, James absently rubbed his knee where flesh met the state-of-the-art prosthetic hidden beneath his khakis. The socket had been chafing lately, another adjustment needed. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. Still 6 hours until his appointment with the VA prosthetist. A notification lit up his screen. Asterisk happy anniversary, hero asterisk. His mother's annual text marking the day of the explosion. James closed his eyes briefly, the train's gentle rocking almost hypnotic, completely unaware that in 4 minutes and 37 seconds, his private battle would become a very public spectacle. Patricia Millwood, though social media would soon christen her priority seat Karen, warded at Westfield Station like she was entering a battlefield. Divorce papers freshly served that morning, her lawyers cautioning about maintaining dignity still ringing in her ears, and now, insult upon injury, no available seats on her train. She spotted James immediately, young, able-bodied in her estimation, and occupying a seat clearly marked for the elderly and disabled. The perfect target for her displaced rage. Those seats, she announced, looming over him with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, are for people who actually need them. Her voice carried deliberately, designed to recruit an audience, not for lazy millennials who can't stand for 20 minutes. James looked up from his phone, momentarily confused. The carriage had gone quiet, that peculiar hush that falls when strangers sense impending conflict. "I qualify for priority seating, ma'am," he replied, his voice low but firm, the same tone he used when training new recruits, respectful but brooking no argument. Patricia's perfectly lipstick mouth twisted. "You look perfectly fine to me." She gestured theatrically around the carriage. "Meanwhile, there's an elderly gentleman standing right there." James followed her gesture to see a man in his 60s who looked mortified to be dragged into the confrontation. "I'm happy to," James began, starting to rise. "No, son, you stay put," the older man interrupted. "I'm perfectly capable of standing. Don't mind her." Patricia's face flushed crimson. "You have no idea what you're encouraging," she snapped. "These young men think a little PTSD from playing video games qualifies them as disabled." A collective intake of breath rippled through the carriage as James slowly settled back into his seat, his jaw tightening. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't know the first thing about me." The train swayed as it rounded a bend, but Patricia maintained her stance, manicured fingers gripping the overhead rail, her knuckles white with tension. She'd gone too far to back down now. Her pride wouldn't allow it. "I know a fraud when I see one," she hissed, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "My son works with real veterans, men with actual injuries, not convenient invisible excuses." James pulled out earbuds, a clear dismissal. This defense mechanism had worked countless times before: disengage, disappear into music, let the world blur away. But Patricia wasn't finished. She knocked an earbud from his hand. "Hey!" A woman across the aisle stood up. "Leave him alone." "Stay out of this," Patricia snapped, then refocused on James. "Show me. If you're really disabled, prove it. Otherwise, give up the seat." James stared at her, his expression unnervingly calm. "I don't have to prove anything to you." "Of course you don't," Patricia sneered, "because you're lying." Something in James shifted then, not anger, but a quiet determination. He'd faced Taliban fighters with less hostility than this woman's gaze. "You really want to do this?" he asked quietly. Before he could say more, Patricia's patience evaporated. Enough games. With surprising quickness, she reached down and yanked up his left pant leg, expecting to reveal a perfectly normal limb. Instead, the gleaming carbon fiber and titanium prosthetic caught the morning light, its mechanical knee joint unmistakable against the fabric. Patricia froze, her hand still gripping the fabric, her eyes fixed on the artificial limb. For 3 excruciating seconds, the entire carriage held its breath. Then someone whispered, "Holy shit." The first video hit Twitter before the train reached the next station. Filmed by college student Zoe Lin, the 15-second clip showed only the climactic moment, Patricia grabbing James's pant leg, the reveal of the prosthetic, and her stunned face. No context, just the raw, shocking moment. By the time transit security officers Tom Rivera and Anita Washington boarded at Central Station, responding to multiple emergency calls, 3 different angles of the incident were being uploaded. Hashtags were forming. A story was crystallizing online, outpacing reality. She'd assaulted him. A woman in a business suit insisted to Officer Washington, thrusting her phone forward with the video already playing. He was just sitting there, minding his own business, added another passenger. Patricia stood shell-shocked, her self-righteousness crumbling under the collective glare of 24 phone cameras now pointed at her. "I didn't. I was just," for once, words failed her. James remained seated, his pant leg still raised, the prosthetic now a silent rebuke to everyone who had ever doubted his invisible struggle. When Officer Rivera approached, James looked up with weary eyes. "Can you just get her off the train? I need to get to work." "Sir, would you like to press charges?" Rivera asked quietly. What she did could constitute assault. The question hung in the air as Patricia's face drained of color. Her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, the contents spilling across the floor, including divorce papers with that morning's date stamped in red. James noticed them immediately. He looked at the scattered papers, then at Patricia's crumbling facade, recognition dawning in his eyes. "No charges," he said finally, "just separate trains." As Patricia was escorted off, a young man approached James, hand extended. "Tyler Martinez, sir. Marine Corps, 2 tours in Iraq." He gestured to his own leg, perfectly intact but with a slight tremor. "TBI and nerve damage. Invisible Wounds Club." James took his hand, a silent understanding passing between them as the train resumed its journey. By noon, #ProstheticLegKaren had amassed over 50,000 mentions. By 3, James had declined interview requests from 4 news channels. By 5, he was sitting in a quiet corner of Veterans Memorial Park, wondering how his private life had exploded so publicly, when a familiar figure approached hesitantly. Patricia Millwood looked nothing like the hurricane who had stormed the morning train. Her hair was pulled back simply, makeup subdued, designer outfit replaced by jeans and a plain blouse. "I was told I might find you here," she said quietly. "The park manager, he's a Vietnam vet, recognized me from the videos." James gestured to the empty bench space beside him, surprising himself with the invitation. She sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "I brought this," she said, placing an envelope between them. "It's a formal apology and a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project. Not that money fixes anything." Her voice cracked slightly. "Rough day?" James asked, the question loaded with irony, but delivered without malice. Patricia laughed humorlessly. "My husband of 26 years left me for his administrative assistant. The papers came this morning." She shook her head. "Not that it's any excuse." "It's not," James agreed. "But it's context." They sat in silence for a moment before Patricia spoke again. "My son doesn't work with veterans. He barely speaks to me anymore." She twisted her now ringless fingers together. "I think I wanted to feel righteous about something, anything, today." James nodded slowly. The human mind will do strange things to protect itself. An alert chimed on James's phone, a text from Tyler Martinez. "You've gone viral, brother. Check your email. CNN wants an interview. You could use this platform, *." James stared at the message, then at Patricia, an idea forming. I'm not going to forgive you today, he said finally. But I am going to offer you a chance at redemption. 3 weeks later, they appeared together on a national morning show, The Veteran and Karen, No co-founding an awareness campaign about invisible disabilities and the dangers of snap judgments. The hashtag had evolved from hashtag Prosthetic Karen to hashtag See Beyond the Surface. In the green room before the interview, Patricia handed James a business card. My son called yesterday, she said quietly. After seeing the campaign coverage, he wants to reconnect. James tucked the card into his wallet next to a faded photograph of his squad in Afghanistan. Funny how the worst moments can lead to unexpected beginnings, he observed. As the stage manager called them to set, Patricia paused. Why did you agree to work with me? After what I did? James adjusted his prosthetic leg, now proudly visible beneath shorts. Because in war, I learned something important. Everyone's fighting battles others can't see, even the ones who look like the enemy. The camera's red light blinked on, and together they stepped forward to tell their story. Not the one that had gone viral, but the more complex human narrative that had emerged from its ashes.